Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast featuring real conversations with conscious objectors to the status quo. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have the spank therapist and writer Ze Royale join us for a conversation about authentic alignment. Together, we talk about not being boxed in by your queer identity, squirting trapeze artists, and nature hoeing. Y'all, do I really need to say anything more about why you should be listening to this episode today? Really, I shouldn't have to. That alone should stand. But if I need to say anything more, I'm just going to say I think I might be in love with them. Ze is amazing and just has so much vulnerability that they bring to this space and so many different lessons that it is so clear they have thought over and really spent time getting to know themselves. And it's obvious in the way that they speak and the way that they bring themselves into spaces and the passion that just comes from being your authentic self. So it's very tangible, and I was so happy to have them on the podcast. So y'all, tune in. Yeah, I also feel like the world's falling apart again. So like I am good and also not good, right? Like I was thinking about this very recently, just before this, like how much of the world is everybody okay?
Yeah, before we get into everything, it's just been thinking like, finally, the pandemic is cleared up. Then it's like, oh no, the Delta. And actually, I also hate Delta Airlines. So I just kind of combine them both.
I love that.
I was like,
yes.
That's why I never fly Delta.
You knew.
But yeah,
you always knew.
I'm a world traveler, so I just have been having a hard time even just working from home.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything before we record too that you want to talk about specifically, don't want to talk about in our conversation?
I'm pretty open. I know that you've noticed that I have Ze Royale as my performance art and sex work based page, and then Zola Bruce is my sex workers project persona. However, part of what I probably want to talk about anyway is the fact that they're both me. So trying to consistently find ways to out myself without needing to broadcast is like to go and announce, hey, by the way, these are both me to my family. I just constantly am just like, you know what, whatever. It's the same person, and whatever. If they decide to research, then they should ask me questions and I'll answer them.
I know. I already want to start asking you the questions. I'm feeling
alignment is a major theme for me right now.
All right. I'm ready to start asking you about it, but I also want to recognize that if you have any questions for me, I don't know, any worries about podcasting or anything else, I always just like to hold a little space before.
No, actually, I've been doing podcasts a lot, and I've enjoyed them, and I just listened to a couple of yours that I really like. So,
what did you think?
I just finished looking. I took notes. I just finished listening to the one on the Anarchy of Beginning from Love with Nat, and I thought that was really interesting and powerful. So that was a good one I just listened to. And then right when you messaged me, I was like, which one of these do I want to listen to? And of course, I chose None, Cum Socks, and Relationship Anarchy with Glitter Money.
Yeah.
So those are the two.
Those
are both very different and very good.
Yes. Thank you. I know every single episode is like a completely different frequency depending on who I chat with, which is kind of makes it fun for me at least, because then I get to kind of tap into all of it.
Yeah. So that's it. I was like, oh, okay, well, it's a comfortable conversation, and I'm all about it.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm happy that you're here. Do you want to start then maybe at explaining to the listeners what the two you talked about, Ze Royale, and then your other project? Would you like to start there?
Yes. So most people know me, especially in the sex work community, as Ze Royale, and that's mostly because of the criminalization of sex work and also the fact that that identity was able to evolve more when I moved to Europe for 7 years because I didn't have to deal with sex shaming, and I was just able to expand ideas around my own sex and sexuality in ways that was more progressive. So returning to the States, of course, I'm really happy to have a full-time job at the Sex Workers Project as Director of Communications. But with that said, still, I don't normally blend Ze Royale with Zola Bruce, which is my Director of Communications role. And as I'm saying it now, I just decided, like, why wouldn't I? Because I'm working at the Sex Workers Project, which is the reason why I feel very comfortable being able to be my full self. A part of my work is to advocate, promote, and also talk about the spectrum of sex work, which is choice, circumstance, and coercion. And at the Sex Workers Project, we do that with immigration lawyers mostly because a lot of the people we work with are migrant sex workers. And in essence, when I was living in Europe, I was a migrant sex worker. So I think it's basically everything's been full circle. And so just so everyone knows, my pronouns are ze, they, and them, and ze being my name, but also being a gender neutral term for those that constantly seem to have an issue with they, them. It's really hard to constantly explain to people that they is not always plural. So, but those are my pronouns. And that is something that I've also come to terms with since I left the States, because I felt like before I left the States in 2012, I was very repressed in all senses, like my sexuality, and also how I was able to really show up in space because I was always kind of serving a very femme performative presence that had to do with a lot of things, had to do with my connection with myself and what I thought, actually a disconnect with myself because I thought I needed to present something different than I actually really felt. And that was for other people, not for me. And also I was in a relationship. I was married to my ex-wife at the time who really preferred me to be high femme. So I was performing also for that relationship, but I got divorced now and I became my own primary, and now I basically keep telling myself, why do you give a fuck? Like also even just what I was saying a second ago, I was like, I don't know why I'm still doing that, but I still do it. But yeah, I think like in essence, I'm just always trying to align myself from the inside out and try to fight against the outside in, which always is a challenge when it comes to dealing with societal expectations and, the fact that people are saying like, oh, you have a master's degree, why would you do sex work? Or what happened to you that you had to do sex work?
Wow.
So that's something that I'm constantly also challenging myself when it comes to like how I feel about that, other people's perception.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you for sharing all of that. There's a lot that I'm excited to talk about. I mean, I want to go back to earlier and you talked about being repressed in your understanding of your sexuality and how you showed up in various spaces. Could you talk more about what that was like? Where were you at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of my second, I would say my second involvement to move, or I was born in Dallas, Texas. So moving from Dallas, Texas, I was already like, yay, I'm in New York. I can be queer. And people don't have a problem with that because I'm at Sarah Lawrence College, which is a small liberal arts school that used to be predominantly female or, genderqueer. So I came into myself first there, but then I have to say I still felt there were a lot of limits around what it meant to be queer, and maybe at that time even just like a lesbian. I never really felt like a lesbian, but I felt like that was the most fitting terminology while I was at Sarah Lawrence, for example. And to be a lesbian was to be able to say, hey, I'm into women and I'm into same-sex partnership. But then as I was evolving even there, I was like, I'm not just into women, I'm into people. I'm into people. I'm into seeing people beyond their gender. However, I did, fast forward, I started dating a lot of women and going to a lot of like women focused clubs at that time. And that
Mm-hmm.
was like the 90s. That was like late 90s. So it was like when New York still had like a pretty fun club culture.
Okay.
And, you can go out, you can do ecstasy, you can meet all these people and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I feel so much freer.
Mm.
But then I do think that I still felt a bit boxed, so that after a while, even though I was dating predominantly women, if I liked someone who was more masculine in like their looks, or
Mm-hmm.
like even if, when I started to really realize that actually I like trans men, or like actually people in general who are more androgynous,
Mm-hmm.
who are not trying to fit a gender role, then I start to feel like, oh, does that mean I'm not a lesbian?
Mm.
And that was me also thinking outside that box, because I was like, maybe I'm not, maybe I can't really say that anymore. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe that wasn't really ever me, but I was again trying to fit into a perception based on the people I dated. And I really came into that more when I met my ex-wife, who
Mm.
also was very androgynous, but she, her pronouns, who I did feel empowered with,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like, oh, she sees me and my sexuality, because at that time I started doing burlesque, and she bought me a pole to put in the house so that I can always dance in the living room. She supported my burlesque gigs, Brown Girls Burlesque, for a while, until I got too serious about it.
Mm.
So after I guess a year of doing it, she's like, "Are you still gonna do this hobby? Like this is not. I mean, this is like interrupting with the rest of your career."
Wow.
And I was like, "How is that?" And she's like, "Well, how can anybody take you seriously if all you're doing is constantly like showing yourself on stage?" And I'm like, I'm an exhibitionist. That's what I like to do.
Yeah.
I thought you liked that too, because lucky you get it at home. So
Yes.
instead of like supporting me, she became jealous of the fact that I was becoming more empowered and more into my body,
Mm.
and therefore didn't really need her to pump me up in order to do my burlesque work. Where probably initially I was still trying to get comfortable with it and comfortable with my body. Once I became more comfortable and more independent in how I started to feel around my sex, the way I expressed myself sexually, then also she started to repress me.
Mm.
And so that became a problem in our relationship. And it definitely did, especially when we got married, because I think this happened mostly when we got married, because all of a sudden there was this, what I call homonormative system that I felt again trapped in,
Mm.
because she really just wanted like the doctor's wife who stayed at home, took care of the dogs, and did all the typical things that
Mm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
heterosexual couples do.
Yeah.
So I felt very slighted, and I felt like very shocked that that I ended up with that type of person.
Mm.
Didn't expect that. So that's why eventually I got out of that relationship and moved to Europe
Mm. Wow.
to be who I am fully, without having any just feeling like, what, fuck relationships at that time. I was like, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be with anybody who first likes me for the way I look, my independence, and my eroticism, but then if they can't control that, then they no longer like
Mm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
So it felt like a power and control situation where it was. And then I left that situation to rediscover another part of myself, which was when I moved by myself to Europe.
And so, in your timeline, how long were you married? When was Europe? How recent was this? I'm trying to conceptualize your journey.
Well, I got married in, oh my God, 2005.
Okay.
And I had already been with my ex-wife for 5 years. So it just seemed like the natural next step for health insurance reasons, also because she wanted me to have a child, even though I decided I didn't want to, which was another
Oh.
problem. Literally right after we got married is when things took a turn, and I still stuck in there for 5 more years.
Mm.
So a decade of my
Wow.
life, from 25 to 35, which I know everyone's like, I thought you were 25. I'm not. I just I just know I'm so much happier that I look so much younger
Mm,
than I used to, and
wow.
I feel like I kind of like regained some years again by creating more of the life that I want instead of the life that other people wanted me to have.
Yeah. Do you feel like those years were lost? You used the word regain.
I mean, I have to say, like, when I even look back at photos, because I did leave for Europe in 2012 for the first time to really actually to see if I could live there by
Mm-hmm.
myself. I went to Amsterdam. I developed a whole community of people there, a kink scene, queer anarchist punk scene. And then I felt more confident that I had community so
Mm-hmm.
that I officially got my residence card in 2013 and really said, hey, I'm moving fully with 3 bags. So I left everything and I moved. And in doing that, I started to feel just more liberated. I felt very determined. I felt
Mm,
like, these are the things I wanted. What did I want to do before I actually met my ex-wife? And this was
yeah.
one of the things I wanted to do. And because I'm such a giver in the way that I'm in connected, like romantic relationships, I had to really think about like my role in that and
Mm-hmm.
how I need to change that so that I don't do that, so that I don't continue to do that in other relationships. So I also processed, it took me some time, probably 2 years when I was in Amsterdam to just heal and process and really get into myself again
Mm,
to a point where I felt super happy that I took that journey, even though it was difficult. It is hard to move by yourself to another
oh,
country.
yeah.
And even if you meet other people, Amsterdam is initially you seem like the easiest place to be, but it is very white and the Dutch culture is very specific when you live there. It's not like when you visit and go to the coffee shops. It's
Yeah.
definitely a bit different when you live anywhere, right? Because you have, and also when you're a migrant. So I didn't speak about this part yet, but I went to school for dance and I was an artist the whole time. I mean, from when I was 8 years old, I've been
Wow.
dancing. So, burlesque was like another like culmination of
Of
that.
course.
And so when I went to Europe, I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna do the work I used. I'm not gonna do social work and therapeutic work like I learned to do in college. I'm gonna just actually go full force for my creative career. And part of that was to be able to connect with people around performance art and then my eroticism. So, I started to develop these very erotic performances that I could do on stage at the Frankreich, which is a queer anarchist punk space. It's like really the only one that still exists in Amsterdam right now that's a bit more grunge and not so, I would say, polished. So it just made me feel more free and I can really get down and dirty in the way I want it to.
That's a big switch, though, coming from a relationship that I was really struck by the words you used of being shocked that you ended up in that kind of relationship structure that would pull away from your independent strength to really
Right.
deciding that I'm going to do everything that I want and screw everybody else. Like, it's a big mind shift that I think is worthy of spending time talking about. Like, how did you start to do that? Where did that strength come from?
That strength really came from within, just knowing that I started to really just read more and spend more time just doing what I wanted to do separate from everybody. Like I was reading The Ethical Slut at that time and I was like also talking to a lot of people that were in alternative relationships and realizing like there's so many ways to connect with others
Mm-hmm.
than the Judeo-Christian society taught me.
Mm.
And realizing how brainwashed I was and how I needed to deprogram myself. So
Mhm.
I also labeled myself a sexual anarchist while I was there because it kind of, I guess, sounds also like what people would call relationship anarchy, but
Mm.
in a way that I felt like I can make sexual connections with individuals that were non-typical. Just finding out like what the specific thing that each person that each lover that I met liked, which may have nothing to do with penetration. It could have to do with just spanking, or I
Mhm.
started to learn more about other kink activities that I could get into to connect to others. And so I felt like, yeah, everybody has individual needs and everybody has individual connections that are very specific to those connections.
Mm.
And I started to develop those more and get rid of guilt around like how many people I was connecting to and how. And of course, safety was always first, but
Right.
in doing kink work, you realize like you don't have to actually do a lot of fluid sharing or any, like it's
Mm-hmm,
probably
mm-hmm,
some of the safest sex work that you could do because sometimes it just has to do with humiliation.
mm-hmm,
It has to do with using tools, but you don't actually have to ever, and actually that's the primary goal is to always have your agreements, boundaries, and consent is always primary. So it just made connecting with others sexually more fun. I just received a lot more gratification than I probably had in my whole life
mm,
with any of my relationships. So it was really for me just to know that I could individually connect and connect with others in ways that's very specific to our connection made me feel more anarchistic, and I could just be self-defined and define my relationships dependent on how I felt those connections were going
mm-hmm.
and in my conversations with others.
What does that actually look like, though? A structure where you are valuing things based on what the connection actually is. I think we could say that, but a lot of people could hear that and not have any idea what that looks like in actual practice.
So I went to play parties for the first time when I was in Amsterdam and realized like, oh, at play parties first, there are different types of structures, but like one of the first ones I went to was kind of like group therapy. Like we all were in a circle before we even started playing,
Wow.
and we shared the things that we desired and the things we definitely did not want. And then also the symbols that we want to use to say, to basically have consent-based language that might
Mm-hmm.
not be no or yes. It might be meow if they want more, or roof roof if they wanted to get your attention. Like just different
Mm-hmm.
types of ways of creating safety. So that was, first of all, really progressive for me because I never experienced that. And then as I started to connect with people at the party and play in different ways, I was like, oh, you like to be spanked like this, and you like to be spanked like this. Just even
Mm-hmm.
that. And then people telling me actually that I was really good at spanking, which is when I became a spank therapist. I just feel like that's an example of just me taking tools that I learned from others and learning how to touch different
Mm-hmm.
bodies in different ways, and not ever thinking like, maybe before that I might think like if somebody is a dom, then that's the only circumstance that they probably would spank, and then they spank and they just use a flog or whatever tools in this way. No, there's not one way. It has to do with your connectivity with a person and how you
Mm-hmm.
communicate with them sexually. Like build up. Some people want softer taps that build up to something hard, and some people want something hard the whole time. Some people want something in the middle, and some people just want it soft. So that is kind of a metaphor for how I evolve in relationships sexually with people. Like sometimes it's just like a soft touch all the time. It's not necessarily like you don't have to go hard, go into penetrative sex. Sometimes just that soft touch on the arm and just like stroking someone's body can be very orgasmic. I also think about it in terms of like when I was growing up in Texas and started to go to bars, I would realize like, you can go to a bar and you can have a really like social, very light conversation with somebody randomly, and that's it. Which is also, it was still good, but it's not like something that you would write home about, or like you wouldn't like
Right.
tell your friends about it. It's just like, oh, we just had a cute little flirt. And then sometimes you get into really deep conversations with people at a bar that you might not have ever met before, but you have this connection with them. You get into a conversation that you didn't expect to have. And then there's the spectrum of that in between. So I feel like that's also similar to how I see sex and how you connect to people sexually. Sometimes you have a very light conversation or light sexual encounter, and sometimes you have a very in-depth sexual encounter. And then sometimes it just fluctuates in between, and it might not, and also with even when you're dealing with one person, it's not the same all the time. So it's just something to
Right.
think about when it comes to your way of communicating. You don't always want to have deep conversations every day, like,
It's fair. Yeah.
so you need variety. And I find that has to do with too, how I see sexual anarchy. I feel like there's always you shouldn't ever assume. You should always ask. And you should always also think about where you are that day. Maybe you had a bad day and you really don't have the capacity to dom somebody or be the aggressor in a situation, even if you have an aggressive personality. Like there was a period of time I went through too, healing from my breakup, my divorce really, um,
Yeah.
that I was like, I don't want anybody to touch me. I don't want anybody to penetrate me. I'm going to be the one all
Mm.
the time. Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that was me being self-protective and it was me not trusting also. And I would need to really build with somebody to trust them to please me. So I just learned how to please others and really got off on that.
I want to ask though, I mean, have you learned to trust others?
To this day, like now,
Yeah.
I'm constantly learning. I do have a life partner right now. We live together. We're not married, but we are building a
Mm-hmm.
relationship constantly.
Love that.
We are non-monogamous. That also means different things to different people, right? But what that means
Right.
for me is that I am in a relationship where we can be fully transparent. We can always check in about boundaries. We always check in about like what is okay and what's not okay when it comes to dealing with other people. And that does not mean it's a make or break. It means that, again, sometimes we have to say like, oh, right now I'm just sensitive about the way you're dealing with this person, but that doesn't mean you should stop. And other times it's like, I'm not feeling right about that situation. Or I didn't feel right. Like we also do sometimes take on a third. And sometimes there's a lot of synergy. And that's amazing when we can have that type of connection with someone sexually, which
Yeah.
again doesn't have to be necessarily sex. It's just like we both erotically like somebody. And then there's times we both like different people and we might not normally even hang out with that person otherwise. So then it's like you can't really force that connection. So I do feel like it's important to have autonomy and independence within a partnership, which is the thing that I didn't feel like I had before.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like if I did something or wanted something that my ex-wife didn't want, then, oh, well, I can't do it. Or it's just
Yeah.
a make or break, where I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel like that in this relationship. I feel like we always have things. I mean, there's always going to be challenges. I mean, as relationships, any relationship has.
Right.
But the difference is the commitment to working through it and the commitment to being completely honest and transparent and not expecting somebody to be on the same page all the time. So yeah, I'm constantly learning though in that sense because it's not really static. It's not like, oh, we made this agreement, so therefore we always love each other in this way. It's like
Of
we made this
course.
agreement, but let's check in about that again.
Right. I once heard this couple that they would talk about getting married for 6 months at a time and then every 6 months check in and see if that's what they still wanted.
Right.
And I think similarly, you're talking about a relationship that has such a dynamic fluidity that I really resonate with and I'm drawn into because I think it will always allow you to be your full self, your partner to be your full self. And there's nothing more beautiful we could ask for. I don't know where this culture of suppression of ourself in a romantic relationship started, maybe in the 50s when we got this like concept of the perfect wife that stays at home, which
Yeah.
translated to negation of ourselves, but it's very pervasive, any narrative that I think is still ongoing in a lot of relationships within
Right.
society.
Right. And so constantly again, like I was saying about like aligning with my true self internally and externally, I feel the same about my partnerships because I feel like when you meet somebody, you meet an individual and
Yep.
we should be always evolving as individuals, although sometimes we get stunted or stuff happens in life and some people just become stunted. But I feel like the relationship is a separate entity that also needs to evolve. And it doesn't
Yep.
mean that you are your relationship ever.
Yes.
There's yourself, your relationship with yourself, and then there's your relationship with others. And that can be formed based on the different ways you connect to different people.
And what happens when you're the person, though, that tends to just remove your own boundaries of self repeatedly? And I feel like maybe you resonate with that concept. How do you learn to actually, in those moments where you might think about, succeeding something that you actually want because of your love for another person? still stay true to yourself. That's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, for me, if I start to feel uncomfortable about my level of giving, because I, again, am a
Mm-hmm.
giver,
Yeah.
I feel like because of my past too, I get very frustrated with myself if I find that I'm giving too much. It's like overwatering a plant, like,
Yes, yes.
and it's something that also is metaphorical for me because I've done that. Um,
Yeah.
I like cacti and succulents, but there's times I've overwatered them. I'm like, oh, I didn't need that much,
Yeah.
So
Tam,
I
yes.
try to really think of it in that way. I learn from nature. I just feel like
It's beautiful.
in the end, like I have to recognize when I'm feeling a certain way and then take a pause. And so that's what I call it. I do take a bit longer to process like what is going on with me, and I have to step away. I have also, even though I haven't been going to a therapist lately, I've gone to therapy in the past and I've taken some tools from that. And I did get my master's degree in social work, so I learned a lot of therapeutic methods. However, that doesn't mean it really
Yeah.
works, that you can do that on yourself. However, it just builds an awareness. It builds an
Certainly.
awareness, and I'm like, okay, something's going on. I need to step back. And also, yeah, be able to be comfortable at being vulnerable. I find that, again, it's a societal thing to think like, you know what, if somebody's doing something I don't like, then fuck them. Instead of like, what is it that you can do, me talking to myself, what is it you can do to express, first of all, your true desire in this situation instead of just block? Because sometimes it feels easier to just block and be like, I'm just going to move on. But it's not really that easy at the same time, because I find that you have to heal from every relationship that you might have blocked. And I try to take those lessons into building, first of all, a closer relationship to myself, and then understanding like, where is this coming from? Why am I frustrated right now with this? Instead of like project it right away,
Hmm.
instead of it being like projectile vomiting onto somebody, your issues,
Yeah.
it's just more like, I'm just going to take a moment of silence and figure this out. Sometimes it's
Okay.
talking to a friend, sometimes it's writing, sometimes it's actually just getting the fuck out of my head and riding my bike
Yeah.
around the park.
Right. Exactly. I mean, so often when we're in those moments, we want to figure out the answer immediately, or at least
Right.
that's been my problem, where I'm always like, no, let's talk about it right now, rather than, dissociating from the moment, stepping back and reconnecting to ourselves, just to actually know what we're trying to get at in these moments.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how it gets so hard, but it does. It's like we're always playing this balancing game of internal reflection time and being in the moment. And like, how do you ride that dynamic, introspection versus presence?
Exactly. And also the things that sometimes I discover is it's not at all about the relationship. It's about like other shit going on at work.
Mm,
It can be
yeah.
stuff going on in family. It can be also just having a bad day in general, like
Mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally, you're just like not feeling great, and you're like,
Yeah.
that person that's in front of your face can easily get the thing that you think will make you feel better. It's not really making you feel
Mm-hmm.
better. So I try to look at all of my relationships that way, whether romantic or not. How can I best connect with this person? What is it that is making it hard right now, if it's when something comes up? And then how much can I actually give? How much energy can I actually give this? And that's what I've really learned, my own capacity,
Mm,
and that isn't always. That's like sexually, emotionally, also like when it comes to how much I can listen, because, I've also had
yeah.
that challenge. That's the reason why I decided not to do one-on-one therapy anymore, because at that time when I was doing one-on-one therapy, I found
Mm-hmm.
that I was just taking in so much of someone else's feelings, that I forgot my own. And it was like, it's something you always learn in school. Like, you have to have your own therapy, or you have to figure out how to separate. But being an empath in general, I take
Right.
in a lot of other people's energy.
Mm,
And it's a natural skill, but it also needs to be protected. So I have to learn
mm-hmm.
self-protection methods when it comes to how much emotional energy that I have to give.
Could you say more on what those ways of protection are? I'm really resonating as a fellow empath, and I'm like, what knowledge do they have that I need to know?
Well, I think one thing I do is a lot of my own personal spiritual work, and I just take pieces of different things that worked for me in my life over time. But like, I have a tarot deck that I always go to.
Okay, yeah.
Dust to Onyx is my newest tarot deck. It's called a melanated deck. It's by a black artist who developed these beautiful cards, and more people are developing their own cards, which I think are amazing. So even just doing something that helps me see myself in third person helps me nurture
Mm-hmm.
myself. So I'll be like, oh, that's resonating with me now. Thanks for I'm telling myself, thanks for channeling that for me.
Yeah.
And that helps me pause. I have to say that I also have learned some Tai Chi movement because I took self-defense and I worked as what we call empowerment instructor, which included teaching self-defense methods and I included like spiritual self-defense because I do feel like that's a major part of self-defense,
Yeah,
like
wow, yeah.
self-protection, even before I leave the house, like just doing like deep breathing or what they call heaven and earth breathing and heart opening breathing. And this really focused breathing that helps me reduce anxiety so that I don't get so highly charged by other people's
Yeah,
emotions.
yeah.
And less bothered. So those are some methods, but I also feel like, again, like being able to embrace my own vulnerability and be okay with things like crying, which I'm actually not, I don't do easily.
I feel you. Yes.
But when I do it, I'm like, oh, wow, okay, that felt good. But you know what? Because I don't easily cry. One thing that really helps me is being near water. So any type of ocean,
Oh, interesting.
pool,
Yeah.
lake, anything like that. Sometimes it's running my body, just standing under the shower for a longer time than usual, like beyond just washing my body, just being like, all right, I'm feeling some release here, you know? And the major primary way, though, since I don't really cry a lot, is being able to come and when I say come, like squirt, like completely
Yes.
release all of the
Amazing.
fluids in my body that have been
Yeah.
pent up, which are similar to tears for me, because being
Mm,
able to be that vulnerable in my body is something that I didn't really discover again until later
right.
when I was around squirters who were talking
Mm-hmm.
about it in Amsterdam. Actually, I
Yeah.
have some friends that started this trapeze troupe called Squirt This Away, where they where they
Wow, I love this already.
trapeze artists squirting amongst like above the audience, which some
Amazing.
people had on like
Wow,
ponchos,
it's a splash
ponchos
zone. Yeah.
with the freedom,
Wow.
the freedom of both
Yes.
gliding in the air and also somehow, skirting was just amazing. And I was like, wow, wow. So just being around sexually free people really taught me also how
Yes.
my sexual freedom also helped me to release.
Yes. Yeah, because when you watch people squirting in air, what matters at that point? Like, why do I care, right? That's what you said, when we started this conversation. Why do I
Yeah,
care? I mean, they don't
yeah,
care. I
yeah.
mean,
And it's one of those things too that again, it's like your bodily fluids you should not be ashamed of. That's just something that happens naturally.
yeah.
But when you repress it, then you really do
Mm-hmm.
suffer. You do suffer. I mean, just think, I'm like, wow, I don't really cry, so maybe I'm really holding in so much suffering that I didn't realize until like something
Mm-hmm.
happens where I just end up bawling over something stupid like tripping and falling randomly and not being able to control that. Like then
Yeah.
realizing like, oh, something else is really going on. So I feel like interestingly enough, it is tied to my sexuality and how I'm able to, be vulnerable with others in order to release. I was gonna say I actually just had an experience like last month where I had this out of body release experience at
Mm-hmm.
a play party. After the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
had hit, nobody was, of course, able to get together. And then all of a sudden, the production company I'm a part of, Kink Out, we decided to have a Kink Out retreat, and I call it nature hoeing because we went to a cabin in Pennsylvania. A really great, amazing a friend of mine who's also a
Yeah.
dom was like, "Hey, help us organize a play party out here at my cabin." going out there, I knew I needed to. I was actually struggling with some other things going on in my life, and I was like, I'm still gonna go play, like why not? Because a lot of times
Mm,
too, if you're struggling with like some things making you sad, maybe you feel, or especially if it has to do with grief, you feel like guilty for receiving any kind of pleasure. But I felt
yeah.
like, wow, this is a time I really need to receive pleasure because I'm not in this
Mm-hmm.
position right now to offer as much, but I need to be open to receiving. And that's what I want to do for this retreat. And I was able to say that in a safe space. And then before I knew it, like my live-in partner and also another dom that I know in community both fucked me at the same time, one anally and one fisting
Mm,
me while I was on my hands and knees on the ground. And I was like completely trusting them and became completely
mm.
ecstatic. And I didn't realize that the
Wow.
whole rest of the party stopped to watch. But I know I was loud
Yes.
because I wasn't even thinking about anyone
Mm-hmm.
being in space. I was just completely, it
Yeah.
was just really feeling pleasure in a way where I felt not guilty. I was able to feel vulnerable and I was
Mm,
able to feel held in a space that made me feel no shame. So
wow.
that was the
Yes.
first. And there's always new things that you can discover about yourself too, erotically, just as you discover things about yourself emotionally. So I felt like, wow, that release
Right.
was really amazing. And I thanked them profusely in other ways, but it was a great
Yes.
exchange. And I felt like, yeah, I mean, it's definitely therapeutic to be able to release in that way.
What do you feel like you learned about yourself in that moment of release?
Well, first of all, I wasn't thinking I was going to be the one being fucked like that. I thought it was going to be my partner. But then they were like, no, you're the one that needs to get on your hands and knees. And I was like, I learned that I need to be commanded because I'm so in control
Mm.
all the
Mm-hmm.
time that I'm always the strong one, and it's hard for me not to
Yeah.
be, but there's also strength and vulnerability. And so I learned that in this way of being able to release, realizing that also like afterwards, people still saw me as strong. It wasn't like this thing where people are like, oh, you were in this vulnerable position and now we see you differently. It was more like they were like happy for me, you know.
Yeah, of course.
And other dom friends, because they normally see me in a more dominant position, were like clapping for me and like, yay, look at you, you're able to
Yeah.
finally receive the pleasure you deserve.
Hmm.
So that's what I learned.
Do you feel like you found what was blocking you during that time previous to this?
Because I had a chosen family member who passed away suddenly. Um,
Mm.
they were dealing with addiction for a while, and regardless
Wow.
of you know, people deal with addiction, but sometimes they're functioning. And at this point, we hadn't heard from her in a while, and we didn't know what was going on with her. So to find out that
Mm.
she passed on was really hard. And when you're hoping still for the like you're still hoping somebody is being cared for, and even
Mm.
if they're not talking to you, that somebody else is caring for them, and then you find out like they passed away by
Mm-hmm.
themselves in their car. um
Mm.
yeah, it's just really a lot to deal with when it comes to like just not wanting somebody ever to die alone, like despite it
Mm.
all, even if there was a freeing aspect because she was suffering for a while, there's still what was the last thing we talked about?
Yeah.
Feelings. But, I was being strong about it because her mother is somebody who's been my best friend since high school. And she, for me, was like, again, being an empath, I was like, she's the one dealing with the pain, like, not me. She's the one,
Mm.
like, she's like, who am I
Yeah.
to say I'm in pain? But
Mm.
I do feel like that release, grieving is a constant process, and that release was just like something that came about in a way that I didn't expect. And I didn't realize I needed that. But I did know I went in with the intention to still try to receive
Mm.
pleasure, try to play. But it went from trying to actually doing it.
Yeah.
So that was definitely something that was helpful for me to release. And it's not something I can talk about normally to the general public or to my friend even being, guess what? I got fucked, I got double
Yeah, of
fucked and
course.
finally I released.
Yeah,
Not in that moment
but
at least, but maybe later on.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I just want to take a moment to honor the space of how difficult that must have been for you. I could feel it as you were talking about it, the weight of that in that
Yeah.
moment. It sounds incredibly
Yeah,
heavy.
it's still very heavy, but I feel like again,
Yeah.
like allowing myself to receive pleasure and not feeling guilty is really important. As I feel like a lot of us just,
Yes.
hold guilt in our bodies too, and what that does to ourselves and how
Yes.
that represses us. And
Exactly.
it's like a self punishment, when you don't think like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
because this happened, I can't receive pleasure. And that actually ruins a lot of people's connectivity with
Mm-hmm.
others too. And I definitely didn't want that. That's not what she would have wanted anyway. Like she was definitely a hedonist. So I kind of also
Mm-hmm.
felt like, what would she want me to do? She would want me to do this.
Yeah. A beautiful way to honor her. Wow. But in those moments of high emotional states, it's often so easy for us to become so disconnected to our
Right.
bodies. So even this, moment you have here of deep connection to the present moment, your physical body, that's huge when there's a lot of emotional high, energy going on in your
Right.
head.
And I feel like a really important part of healing, when I realized, is being able to find ways to consistently release and consistently forgive yourself, or consistently allow
Mm-hmm.
yourself to, well, for me, also, another thing I deal with is this idea of perfection and perfectionism, and how to be okay with making
Yeah.
mistakes. And that can have to do with making mistakes in how I communicate with others. It can also have to do with making
Mm-hmm.
mistakes in, I don't know, just how I actually treat myself. Sometimes I'm like, I should have treated myself better, but then I'll be hard on myself about it. So even just stuff like that, just being able to recognize, again, like
Yeah.
we were talking about before, and that's what I really liked about listening to the Anarchy of Beginning from Love, just the somatic release
Mm.
and really recognizing how you feel in your body versus what you're saying. And again,
Yeah.
that having to do with alignment and allowing yourself to understand, like, oh, okay, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now, but I'm saying I'm not.
Mm.
That I'm actually fine. Like when people are like, how are you
Exactly.
doing? Fine.
Every time. Good. Good. I
What's going on with
know.
you? Nothing.
Nothing at all.
There's always
Oh,
something, and you're never just fine. So it's just like being able to recognize
yeah.
that and being okay with it. It's the same thing about how I want to build relationships with people. I know things cannot be perfect, and be able to recognize that.
Exactly. And you use the word alignment, which I know ties originally to what we talked about at the very beginning of your different concepts of self.
Yeah.
Could you say more now, knowing like this fuller picture of who you are, how those two things align and what struggles you've had bringing them into alignment?
Yeah, so one thing that I realized, even though I just look back at growing up, is I used to be very quiet, and a lot of times the reason why I was quiet is because I didn't align with the things people were saying, and didn't
Yeah.
understand what the
Yeah.
external world was about. I really love my subconscious world, and that's the
Yes.
reason why I'm a writer and I love to write, because I feel like even reading my own writing, I learn about myself.
Yep.
And so for me, alignment is making sure, first of all, that I'm okay with the fact that I am my primary, that I am always the one that needs to be checked in with first
Yep.
about everything.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. If I start to profusely start sweating or feeling like, some nervous energy, I need to recognize what that is and not just
Mm-hmm.
say like, just like brush it off, and also be okay with it and not embarrassed, because that's something that I always deal with too,
Mm-hmm.
is like, because I know that I'm so different than external world people, I sometimes get embarrassed and I just go into quiet zone.
Yeah.
So I've learned that I need to pay more attention to my body at all times. and
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. And in order for me to be able to connect to others in healthy ways, I have to do that first. And then in connecting with others, understand that also that's not always going to be aligned, and that's okay. That, even if I'm really aligned with someone, like even in my current relationship, I'm like, I really feel aligned with my partner, but there's times when I don't feel aligned, and then I feel like, is this supposed to be the relationship that I'm in? Is this am I doing the
Mm,
right am I with the right person? Instead of going into that kind of fatalistic thought, to really start to realize, okay, what is it I'm blocking? Where is the self-protection coming
mm-hmm.
from? How can I communicate this differently than just being angry or resentful or sad? I also feel like part of my alignment that I always do need to embrace is also this feeling of sadness. There's sometimes sadness, especially as a strong person or somebody who thinks they have to be strong in a certain way again,
Yeah.
starts to translate into anger when it's really sadness. It's not anger, it's like
Mm,
a self-protective sadness. So just
mm-hmm.
knowing myself more and really being able to be accountable to me and not expect
Yeah.
anybody else to be able to understand or do that for me is a major way that I start to gain more of alignment. Also, just saying it out loud. Like, I even feel like through this conversation, I was like, yeah, even at the beginning, I was like, am I going to present myself as Ze Royale or Zola Bruce? I'm like, I'm both of those people. and
Yeah.
and not be ashamed to say that. Like,
Yeah.
even now I have some major successes coming up that is going to definitely blast me internationally around the world. I have three
Hell
films in the
yes.
Berlin Porn Film Festival coming up,
Fuck yes.
and yes, exactly, fuck yes. And I feel like, I'm so proud of all three of them. I feel like,
Yes.
what I was set out to do, and when I started to get more into myself, sexually and in the kink world and doing sex work and expanding my ideas around sex work, is that I didn't see a lot of BIPOC genderqueer people in porn.
Mm-hmm.
I was like going to
Yeah.
Amsterdam has major porn libraries, and you have a small, like, you see this small section, and all it said was black
Mm-hmm.
ass and black pussy. There was like barely any other titles, and there's
Wow.
not a lot of black people in general that are empowered
Mm.
in the porn world. So I was like, I need to see myself in porn. So therefore, maybe
Yes.
I should try it. And I just fell into it, and and I enjoyed it, and I also still enjoy it. But I specifically have some connectivity with the one of the artists that I work with on a horror porn called Ruptured. That's going to be at the Berlin Porn Film Festival, and also I'm so lucky to have a partner who completely supports all of my erotic activities,
Amazing.
who proposed that we should do a porn together called Hard at Work during the quarantine. They
Yes.
proposed it. I didn't even propose it. They were like, you know what? I saw a call out for like people who are already partnered who would be interested in doing porn and home, because here we are in a quarantine and you can't just get random people to get together at this point. So we did Hard at Work, and it's really a hot porn, and it made the festival as well. And
Wow.
both are BIPOC connections. My partner's Dominican. Lena, who the other star in Ruptured, is from Mexico, so she's Mexican. Also, my partner is transgender nonconforming, so that's really great for both of us to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gender nonconforming, or transgender nonconforming. You don't really
Mm-hmm.
see this type of connection in any film, so that was amazing to see my
Mm-hmm.
ourselves on film, because we're like, ooh, we're
Yeah.
hot. You don't see it when you're,
Yes.
I mean, besides like home porn that people might make personally, you don't see a professionally done porn of your own connective and see your own connectivity IRL. So
Right.
that was also very amazing, and people really wrote me saying how much they loved that, and that they never saw themselves on film, and they're so supportive of the fact that we're showing a different side of connectivity, especially for trans and gender nonconforming people
Mm-hmm.
in the BIPOC community. And then I, for the first time, line produced my own documentary. This is the first of the series, called Sexual Healing. And that is really about the fact that, we're in a society that is really a rape-based culture here in the United States. Like, I recognize that that's why people do not support sex work, because they just think of trauma and assault and
Yeah.
violation. And people also, the amount of wage theft sex workers deal with here because of criminalization have to do with just being exploited all the time and not being
Mm.
respected in the work. Meanwhile, a lot of people would not be as creative sexually if they weren't learning from sex workers. They might not be able to understand their bodies if it weren't for sex workers. There's so
Oh,
many
yes.
things, there's so many aspects. Connectivity is never talked about when it comes to sex and sexuality, and that is something that I really feel is so important when it comes to healing. This is what the documentary talks about, how sex workers have healed through sex work themselves, and
Mm.
also how they heal others. And we never hear about ourselves as healers. And I feel like that
Yeah.
is really important to put out there, that, a lot of us are the people who educate and help
Mm.
others. There's not even barely any sex ed out there. So I feel like, again, sex educators are also sex workers, and how important that what I call us essential workers are in the society, and how we
Mm-hmm.
need to change the trajectory around sex and sexuality by thinking about the consent, and from a consent perspective, not in a
Mm-hmm.
exploitative, we can just take from you and never pay you perspective. Who wants to go to work and not get paid? That's what I always ask people that are against sex work. I'm like,
No
would you
one.
go to work and not get paid? How would you feel?
No.
I mean, and
Right.
also the amount of violation that people, sexual violation that people deal with on a daily basis. It's not just about sex work. It's about our society being wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really proud of the work. I'm really looking forward
Yeah.
to just bringing up this topic in many other ways, like sex workers as parents and guardians, and also
Yes.
specifically in the BIPOC, transgender, nonconforming community, and also expanding ideas in general, because sex work is not just street work. It's also like,
Yes.
yeah, more people have joined OnlyFans now because they realize, oh, I can get into my body and I can make money online during a pandemic. Like, that is significant.
Mm-hmm.
That's significant. That's
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of people. So I do feel like there needs to be less judgment, less shaming, more connectivity, more healing. And I just feel like everyone should have bodily autonomy in general in the society, and really
Yeah.
appreciate each other's bodies instead of denigrate each other. So that's what I'm all about. And I'm really happy to feel, again, aligned with myself and my work
Yeah.
and what I put out there.
And to come on this space embodying both.
Yeah, for the first time, really.
Yes, amazing. It's so beautiful. I get so giddy to have people on the show like you who have found their authentic self and who connect so deeply and can talk about the difficulty of getting there, but equally the joy of connecting and finding work that you're so incredibly passionate about that it just pours out of you like it is now as you're talking about it.
Thank you so much. I really actually appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity. I mean, you never know, like, especially I'm talking to someone new, like what's going to come out of the podcast. But I feel like this is
Yeah.
actually a very healing moment, because, I feel like,
Good.
again, a type of release by having the conversation. So thank you. I really appreciate the fact that we were able to have this
Yeah,
conversation.
of course.
And I also have to thank the bitch, Empress Wu,
Yes.
for actually being the third person who fucked the shit out of me at the Nature retreat. So
Yes.
things come full
Yes.
circle.
Amazing. I
I got
love
to
that.
experience their work firsthand, which is great.
Wow.
Because like
Wow.
sometimes you're in community and people are good at what they do, but now I really know that they're good at what they do. So
Exactly.
from firsthand. So
Personal
So
review.
I really appreciate that, and I'm really happy and fortunate to have such a community.
Mm. And your story, I think, with Empress Wu, all this is exactly what you mean when you say sex work is healing.
Yeah,
In your
totally.
vulnerability and your story and your journey and everything that you shared here, you provided a beautiful example of how healing it could be.
I did. Yeah, I just realized that.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I did. I really did.
Exactly. In a moment where were faced with such difficulty of emotions of loss and grief to release. How beautiful.
Yeah.
How beautiful.
Yeah, I feel really held. I really love my
Yeah.
kink out community. I also, yeah, just love, yeah, I have some amazing friends in general that have held me. So I'm really feel very fortunate for the ways I've been able to connect to others because it does actually come back to me. It's very reciprocal.
Yeah. And that's when life becomes fun. I feel like when all the natural things about yourself just start to pour out in everything that you do.
Right. And that's where I feel like I am right now. So that lets me know I've
Yes.
evolved.
Yes. Hell yes. Oh, is there anything else you want to say on this? Otherwise, I can give a closing question.
No, I think I've said a lot.
You
I've
have,
released a
yeah.
lot and
You
revealed a
have.
lot.
I always just like to ask. Because otherwise, the one of the things I ask everyone on the show is what is one thing you wish other people knew was more normal?
Well, I wish other people knew that being a sexual being is very normal. None of us would have been born without it. And I feel like in order to really get more into yourself, really give up all these ideas that who you are in your body, what your desires are wrong. You
Mm,
know, that's not wrong. Other people are wrong. People who aren't
yes.
able to, enjoy themselves, that's their problem, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
The more you can really empower yourself by whether it's masturbation, whether it's connecting to other people, whether it's like finding out new things through kink, or,
Yes.
I also want to speak for the asexual people out there. It's not
Yeah.
necessarily about sex. It's about
Mm-hmm.
intimacy, how you want to communicate with others on many different frequencies and levels. And I feel like that is something that people should really get to know about
Mm-hmm.
themselves and what they desire.
Yep.
And, that's pleasure activism.
Adrienne Marie Brown. There it
That's
is.
right. That is right.
Great book. Always plug that. Um, yeah, and it's beautiful too because you also talked about this, right? During this
hmm
conversation of how you do connect with yourself. You're for asexual people talking about that connection to self. You spend time alone, reflecting, tarot, all
Yeah.
these other pieces. And I think even that, it's so important to establish routine, rituals, things that we know bring us peace. And I'm so glad that you found those.
Yeah. Yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
Holding space that they may no longer work in the future and then find a new one, right? That's the difficulty of it. But
Right.
yeah, and I'm so excited about the work that you're doing. Where can people find your porn? Is there somewhere you want to send people?
Yeah, Aorta Films. It's literally aorta.com.
I've literally been on there. Are you on there?
Yeah, I'm in several of the porn there, and there are different ones. There's even one called Teen Angels, which is like the first time I did any kind of like, that's really it's really a fun role play. I would like you
Oh,
to check that one out if you hadn't already. And then also, Ruptured is
yeah.
directed by Max Disgrace, who is a really great
Mm-hmm.
director, very creative, very different angles in the way that they film. And Good and Green in Berlin is also a really amazing director who I did a film with that was funded by Erica Lust, but it is very specific to Good and Green style. So it's called The Toilet Line, and it's very thematic for Berlin, the fuck in the
That.
toilet. Um, and then let me go all the way back to my very first one with Eric Pussyboy. He opened my world up to porn in a very experimental way with Neurosex Pornoia 1, 2, and 3. Neurosex Pornoia is what he calls post-apocalyptic post-porn.
What does
So
that mean?
I love when people put post in front of something because somebody asked me like, excuse me, can you tell me what post porn is? They're like, it's like the porn after porn. I was like, yeah,
What?
it's the more. It's just more progressive than what I think we initially saw as porn. Because I don't know about you, but I've only seen like initially like No Man's Land or like some type of like, blonde women with, fake boobs and long
Right.
nail porn
Right.
versus like this, which is very, very experimental with all types of people of all genders, all cultural backgrounds, and also using some really weird technological aspects, and it's
Mm,
called neurosex pornoia. So even that is really progressive. So yeah, I feel like, again, doing film has really opened my world up to all the different types of kink that are out there and all the different ways you can connect to folks.
right. And it's so important to have representation of a diversity of people in media so that the people who are watching it can see themselves in it and recognize that this
Right.
level of kink, this level of play is something that I can do. And so I'm just so excited for you to be doing this truly, life-changing work for the internal space of people's eroticism. It's badass and exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to have you. It's been so much fun to chat and learn about what an amazing, strong person you are.
It's great to meet you too, and it's
Yeah.
really good to like learn more about your podcast. I'm gonna keep listening.
Oh, thank you. That means so much. This is all I do. I love to just talk to people, learn their stories, and honor the individuality of everybody. Everyone has a unique truth that I think, now I'm getting hippie woo woo, but truly I think has like a lesson that they could share with the world in discovering their own authentic self.
Right, and I definitely believe that, and I believe in the title of this podcast too. It's
Mm,
definitely important, modern anarchy.
amazing. Yes. Thank you. I love that. If you enjoyed today's conversation, then subscribe for new episodes released every Wednesday, and follow us on Instagram at Modern Anarchy Podcast, where we open up a dialogue about all of these topics. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. And a special thanks to one of my favorite artists, Yor Smith, for the intro and outro song to this show.